So today we have an interview with Yoshinori Kitase as he reflects on the 30th anniversary of PlayStation and how Final Fantasy VII was such a big part of the PlayStation brand. And he also talks a little bit more about that move away from Nintendo over to PlayStation for the franchise. So if any of that sounds cool to you, feel free to click the like button. And if you're new here and you'd like to stick around and help support the channel, you can subscribe. And as always, leave your thoughts in the comments down below. So this interview comes to us from Eurogamer, who sat down with Yoshinori Kitase to reflect on the achievements of Final Fantasy VII and how the PlayStation brand helped bring that game to life, but also how Final Fantasy in general kind of molded the identity of that console. So starting off first, we have the very well-known tale of how Squaresoft jumped ship from Nintendo over to the Sony PlayStation. Now, this is something that we've covered in previous videos, and the gist of it is essentially, it comes down a lot to technology. Nintendo with the N64 was still using cartridge-based technology, which, for the time was fine, but the vision that Kitase and the developers had for FF7 just wasn't going to work on that console with those cartridges. It really would have limited them in what they could do as a creative team. So looking over at the Sony PlayStation and the CD-ROM technology, they realized they could utilize that so much better. Way more space, full motion videos, higher quality assets. It would really allow them to bring their vision to life as closely as possible to what they had planned out initially. Now, we also learned recently there's another piece to that story, and this came to us via another Eurogamer interview with Shawn Layden, who was one of the previous heads of PlayStation and also spent a good chunk of his working career at Sony. And he recalls back in the day when the PlayStation was first getting off of the ground, how it was actually Sony Music Group, not the Sony Entertainment Group, that helped bring FF7 from Nintendo to PlayStation, as the Sony Music people would wine and dine Squaresoft employees with whiskey and good food until the wee hours of the morning to try and massage some sort of deal to get them to leave Nintendo to go over to Sony. Kind of like a, you scratch my back, I'll scratch your back. Look at this good food and liquor we have. Isn't this so wonderful? And before you know it, FF7 would leave Nintendo to go to PlayStation. So the moral of that story is that it's not just one certain defining factor that got FF7 over to the PlayStation brand. Yeah, that CD-based technology was first and foremost and incredibly important, but it really was a group effort. It took a lot of people at Sony to really convince Square to be like, hey, you should come over to our platform. You can do so much more with this game that you're building. So I just thought that was actually a really funny, unique story from Shawn Layden about how FF7 eventually got to PlayStation. And again, it really is a group effort. Now, Kitase also goes on to say that the PlayStation 1 was something that would allow them to make FF7 so much more cinematic by saying, with FF7, the PS1 graphics chip finally allowed me to use the kind of cinematic presentation that had been my ideal all along. We needed a style of visual depiction that would naturally be accepted like a film is, and it was the PS1 that made that possible for the first time. He then goes on to expand further with the inclusion of full motion videos, or FMVs, that FF7 OG is known for. He goes on to say, we saw FMV was very important from the beginning of development, and it was actually one of the big reasons why we picked the PS1 with its CD-ROM drive to develop the game on. He continues by saying, up until then, FMV sequences and gameplay had usually been separated, which really obstructed the immersion and anticipation for the player. However, for FF7, we deliberately did not insert blackouts when moving from full motion video to gameplay and took care to tie them together seamlessly to avoid reducing the immersion. So again, with the CD-ROM technology, they could fit way more onto it and really bring to life those full motion videos and those pre-rendered backgrounds, but also combine them together. There are so many sequences in the OG FF7 where you're seeing this really incredibly cinematic cutscene, but then you see the playable characters in the same shot. And in some occasions, you're able to move Cloud around, or Tifa or Barrett, whoever it is that you're controlling. And it was incredibly impressive at the time, and again, added to that cinematic quality of Final Fantasy VII that would become a big piece of Final Fantasy's identity moving forward. So being able to blend those two things together as a kid blew my mind, because I was coming off of the era of Super Nintendo and Genesis and Nintendo and 2D pixel art, and to see these fully realized 3D worlds and have a character I'm controlling while also watching this movie was just mind-blowing. Up next, Kitase goes on to talk about the iconic opening of Final Fantasy VII, where that shot of Midgar is revealed in full. We get that incredible logo drop, and then we move back into Midgar, into the train station, and how that was actually inspired by Blade Runner. But they didn't want to just do a Blade Runner imitation, they had to figure out a way to do it their way. Kitase goes on to say, however, just doing that would be no more than a simple imitation. One advantage that we had over cinema as a game was the ability for the player to control a character and actually enter into that world. By having the camera zoom in rapidly from the wider cityscape to the train, and then seamlessly transition to Cloud jumping off at the platform and becoming controllable, we depicted the scale and presence of the city itself, as well as immersing the player directly into that world. He would then go on to say that it took them several months to try and figure out a way to get that to work properly, but once they did it, he was confident that the game would be a massive success. And that opening to OG FF7 still stands out for so many people. You think of FF7, there's a few moments that stick out, but that intro in particular, giving you that shot of Midgar and then going all the way back in, cutting to the train, zooming in further, cutting back to the train until you get back to the train station, and now you're controlling Cloud. It's all seamless. There's no loading in between then. And this is something that would become very frequent within the Final Fantasy franchise with games like 8, 9, and 10, where you had these beautiful FMV sequences, but you could still control your party. Now, speaking of full motion videos and graphics, they bring up Final Fantasy The Spirits Within, which was not a great movie, flopped at the box office, but they did learn some lessons with things like The Spirits Within, as well as Advent Children when it came to the gaming side of Final Fantasy. Kitase would go on to say, our technology for rendering human characters with realistic proportions advanced with Spirits Within, and that was then incorporated back into the games from Final Fantasy VIII onwards. The way we depicted action on the gameplay side also evolved from FF7 onwards, and that really culminated and came together in Advent Children. In this way, these two separate feedback cycles pushed the evolution of our cinematic expertise. And that's the big thing you notice with this article, is they really wanted FF7 not just to be a video game, but to feel like a massive cinematic playable movie. And speaking on The Spirits Within, man, what a disappointment. I've only seen this movie once, and I was a little kid, and you gotta remember, we were in the golden era of Square Soft games. We had Final Fantasy VII, we had Chrono Cross, FF8, FF9, and I think they were building up to Final Fantasy X at the time. So we had a really great pedigree to pull from. And I remember watching that movie as a kid and thinking to myself, this doesn't feel like Final Fantasy. It's pretty to look at, but I don't really feel Final Fantasy in this movie, and clearly it did not connect with a lot of people. But the advancements they made with that technology, you see it in the gaming side of things. The jump from FF7 to 8 is a massive leap in terms of the visuals, having full-sized, proportionate characters running around these pre-rendered environments that are even more detailed, monsters that are more detailed, summon animations that are more detailed. It's incredible. And then you move from 8 to 9, and while it's not a massive jump, you see the refinement between those entries and how 9 is really the culmination of everything they did on the PlayStation in terms of graphics, real-time graphics, FMVs, battle stuff. They really built off of each other really well, and then you move into FF10, which just blew people away with its visuals, its voice acting, especially that art style. The art style of 10 is gorgeous and still holds up to this day. So even though the movie side of things didn't really work out, they did learn some really great lessons that they could move into the games, especially with Advent Children. The writing of Advent Children, the story, not great. It's very obtuse with its writing. Dilly-dally, shilly-shally, for example. Which I get what they were doing with that scene. It wasn't written well, but Tifa's essentially telling Cloud, you're weighing yourself down, man. You're letting things bother you that shouldn't bother you. Things that you think are your fault aren't your fault. Which makes Cloud's return later in that movie so great, where he's like, I feel lighter, I think I've lost some weight, must have been all that dilly-dally. It's not written well, but I get the idea. But it's really those action sequences that stood out in Advent Children that really kind of influenced the movie industry and gaming going forward. And looking at combat in games like Dissidia or 7 Remake and Rebirth, and even Final Fantasy XVI, it feels, again, very heavily influenced by what we saw in Advent Children. Seeing Cloud and Sephiroth flying around fighting each other, we can do that now in these games, so it's pretty cool. Kitase also goes on to talk about how the visuals of FF7 were super unique at the time by saying, on the other hand, I also think that the game's setting, with its distinctive religious outlook and concepts like the life of the planet, as well as the Japanese subculture trends seen in the character design, brought a unique taste that was not seen in American or European works at the time, which is true. Many people's introductions to RPGs and JRPGs and their art styles and their style of storytelling came with FF7. That was, for a lot of us, our first indoctrination into this world, and it would just kind of become so synonymous with FF7 and kind of created a bigger fandom out of it. Because it wasn't quite Western, but it also wasn't quite anime. It was, something different and unique that really stood out. Now, up next, they talk about one of the things that is the most stand out about the OG FF7, and one of the reasons why it connects with people to this day is the theme of loss, which is something that Sakaguchi, the creator of Final Fantasy, wanted to express in 7 in particular after experiencing a loss in his own life. Kitase expands by saying, "This was expressed through the medium of cinema and Spirits Within, and as a game through 7. We all find ourselves faced with the loss of someone dear to us at some point, myself included, and I think that the theme of how we reconcile the memories of our departed loved ones at these times and continue their legacy was one that really stayed with people." And that's one of the reasons why to this day it stands out. We've all at some point in time have or will experience a massive loss. For me, earlier in the year, my dog passing away, Nalabel, who was the world to me. And I had some people in the comments say, like, why are you upset over, a dog passing away? It's nowhere near as impactful as losing a person. And for you, maybe not. And for some people, pets are just pets. But my dog was like my kid. She was my daughter. And she meant the world to me. And she was 15 years old when she passed, and I was lucky enough to have her for 13 of those years. And just having her in my life and taking care of her, I learned so much more about myself and the people around me and the world around me in a weird kind of way. And because of my dog, I'm still here. She's one of the reasons why, I chose not to, leave this planet, so to speak, without getting too deep. And even though I wake up every morning and she's no longer in the house, I still take those lessons I learned from her with me into my daily life. And her personality quirks, the things that she did still sit with me. I also think about my grandpa on my mom's side who passed away, and he was someone who was just so charismatic and fun and super sharp. And how when he passed, his energy obviously is no longer with us, but the lessons we learned from him, the memories we made with him are still impacted in us, and me and my sister, my mom, my aunts, and my uncles. So even though they're gone, in a roundabout way, they're still with us. They still exist as long as we, carry on that legacy that they left for us. And just very quickly, I remember a moment in particular where I was with my mom at my grandma's house and my grandpa was telling a joke. And I'm a very reserved person. I don't emote too much. I keep to myself. And the joke was really funny. And I cracked a smile and started laughing. And the moment he saw that, his face just lit up because it's like, finally, he got me to laugh at something. So those memories, they stick with us, and it influences how we live our lives, and that's intrinsically tied with FF7. A character like Aerith, who is super shy and reserved, meets someone like Zack, who is the complete opposite. He's loud, he says what he feels, he's boisterous, but he's also super joyful and positive, and that impacts Aerith, and she then takes on elements of those personality traits. And then when she meets Cloud, she continues to kind of put those traits on the Cloud in the way that she acts with him and how positive she is. And for a character like Aerith, she obviously has a lot weighing her down, but she does not let the weight of being the last Cetra weigh her down. She doesn't let the fact that she knows she's gonna die change how she lives her life. She still wants to live it to the fullest, no matter what. And when she meets Cloud, that all comes full circle. And the way that she interacts with him is very much, how Zack would interact with him. So in a roundabout way, Zack still exists. He still lives on through these characters. And when Aerith passes away, she still lives on through Cloud and the rest of the party. It's really beautiful. And speaking of Cloud, Kitase goes on to say that one of the reasons why people click with 7 so much, as well as a character like Cloud, is because of how different he was from other video game characters at the time. He goes on to say, with Final Fantasy VII, we took an even bigger step in that direction by having it revealed near the end of the story that the protagonist actually had another separate personality that not even the player was aware of, which I love. And again, back in the day, we had a lot of characters that maybe were a little two-dimensional, super heroic, super badass, pulled off a lot of cool feats, but a character like Cloud was so three-dimensional. so many layers to this character. And as you play through that game, you start to realize, I don't know if this character is well. I don't know if he's remembering things properly. And then you finally get that big reveal at the end that, you know, Cloud has been through so much trauma and PTSD and cell degradation, which I think was only added with like the compilation and some of the newer stuff. But you get this big reveal of a character who isn't perfect. He's not infallible. He can make mistakes. And that's what makes him such a likable, memorable character. You know, there's nothing worse than when you're playing a game or even watching a movie in particular and you have a character that just kicks everyone's butt. They never get hurt. They're never in danger. You know, basically any movie with The Rock. As an audience member, you don't have a reason to care about that character. Why should I care about this character who's in a fight scene against 5 people and I know they're just going to win the fight at the end of the day? You got to add drama. You got to add some weaknesses to these characters to make the stakes higher so you actually fear for their life and fear for what's going to happen to them. And to end the video, they switch over to Hamaguchi, who was somewhere hiding around in this interview. They didn't mention him at first, but he's got a closing statement on why not just Final Fantasy, but 7 in particular is still so impactful 20 to 30 years later by saying they were the first to do something well and do something that's never been done before because of that advancement in the technology. He even references things like Star Wars and The Matrix, how these were these big properties that came out and did something no one else was doing, which helped them stand out so much more. He continues by saying, why I think it has remained so well loved and so popular for 20 to 30 years is because it was obviously the first big RPG to use a 3D world like that on the PlayStation. And it didn't just use 3D graphics. It was the first time we actually saw a game which had that level of depth, going into a world and showing the relationships between characters on a journey. You can't really separate it from the developments in technology at that point in time. And that is why to this day it is still so impactful. Again, as a kid coming off of, you know, Super Nintendo and Genesis, playing games that were relatively short, didn't really have a lot of depth when it came to the characters or the world building, and moving into a game like Final Fantasy VII completely changed my brain chemistry as a kid. And for the first time, I felt like, wow, I'm not just playing a video game, I'm actually going on an adventure. These characters aren't one-dimensional. There's layers to all of them. The way that the story kept unfolding and expanding with side quests and the big reveals and like the big loss of, you know, Aerith really left an impression on me and so many other people. And what's even cooler about this is now with the 7 remake trilogy, Kitase is essentially able to kind of bring his original vision of Final Fantasy VII to life with today's technology and the changes in some of the writing with Nojima-san, and having people like Hamaguchi who played the original, who know its impact, come on board and kind of help bring that back for the remake trilogy. It's such a lightning in a bottle kind of development moment for these developers with this entire trilogy. So with that being said, that is the video. Let me know in the comments down below what you guys thought on what we covered in today's video. I am Curious Corduroy. I will see you guys in the next video, and please remember to always be excellent to one another.